Okay, so good evening and welcome to ISAPE's Why Think Tanks Matter Forum. We'd like to thank Professor Jim McGann, Emma Harris, and everyone else at the Think Tanks and Civil Societies program at the University of Pennsylvania for inviting us to be a part of this global initiative. As it is traditional, all national and regional Why Think Tanks Matter forums take place after the global launch of the Global Go-To Think Tank Index report, which happened yesterday. Last year, there were 149 hosts, 20 of them from Latin America. So we are thrilled and honored to be adding to this initiative, hosting this event from Brazil. My name is Guilherme Thudium, and I'm the president of the South American Institute for Policy and Strategy, ISAPE, a think tank based in Porto Alegre. And today I'm joined by our vice president, Augusto Dall'Agnol, our research director, Dr. Larlecianne Piccolli, who is joining us from Clarksville in the United States, and our senior fellow, Dr. Mariana Kalil, who is kindly joining us from the Superior War School in Rio de Janeiro. I'd like to thank our communications director, Poliana Almeida, and junior fellow, Thais Araripe, for helping us set up this virtual event as well. Finally, I would also like to thank the US Consulate General in Porto Alegre for their long-lasting partnership. This panel will be comprised of 10 to 15 minutes presentations from our experts under the predefined theme, Why Think Tanks and Policy Advice Matter in Times of Crisis. After my opening remarks, Dr. Larlecianne Piccolli will further address the theme, Why Think Tanks Matter in Times of Crisis, followed by a presentation by Augusto Dall'Agnol on science and technology in Brazil in times of crisis, the cases of Instituto Butantan and Oswaldo Cruz Foundation. And finally, Mariana Kalil will offer her closing remarks on the future of think tanks and policy advice in Brazil. After the presentations, we will select a couple of questions from the chat for the Q&A. ISAPE is still a young institution when compared to other well-established think tanks in Brazil. Last year, it was our 10th anniversary, and we were just recently indexed at the TTCSP's database, although we are not yet ranked. We are a nonprofit, private, and independent institution focused on research, teaching, and consulting in the areas of strategic studies and international relations. ISAPE seeks to foster innovation and international studies through the integration of related themes that are often neglected, such as war studies, regional integration, and technology. Our mission is to assist in the development of public policies in Brazil and South America, aimed at promoting sovereignty, citizenship, sustainable development, and regional integration. ISAPE incorporates values based on the collective production of knowledge, intellectual autonomy, and synergistic work with academia, government, the military, the private initiative, and civil society. Although Brazil has high-ranked think tanks in the area of international studies, they are all mainly stationed in the central states of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, or in the capital, Brasilia. Thus, ISAPE stands out as one of the largest, if not the largest, purely independent and non-partisan think tank that is not politically or university affiliated in the southern Brazilian region, focused exclusively on international studies and regional integration. Brazil still has to improve when it comes to think tanks. According to data from the 2020 Global Go-To Think Tank Index report released yesterday, Brazil has 190 think tanks, whereas Argentina has 262 Germany has 266. South Korea has 412. India has over 600. China has almost 1,500 think tanks, standing in second place. And the United States has over 2,000 think tanks indexed. Thus, our objective at ISAPE is also to fill this absence of independent international studies think tanks in Brazil, especially in its southern region. I'd like to thank everyone in our audience tonight. And without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Larlecianne Piccolli to offer her contribution to our panel.
Thank you, Guilherme. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to greet my colleagues, Mariana, Guilherme, and Augusto, with whom I share this event today, and our virtual audience attending this webinar. Well, initially, I would like to say that it's such a pleasure to take part in this historical moment for our institute, ISAPE. Saying that, it's important to publicly recognize all efforts that ISAPE's president, Guilherme Thudium, and vice president, Augusto Dall'Agnol, have been doing to raise our institute to the international level. As Guilherme pointed out, it's not an easy path to consolidate as a think tank in Brazil, but we are proud to say that ISAPE is paving this way for over 10 years with hard work and competence. And this event today shows that. So I prepared a brief talk pointing out why think tanks matter in time of crisis. But at the end of the day, it seems to me that these three main insights that I brought today overcome the time of crisis and show that nowadays, more than ever, think tanks are an essential part of civil society at any time. That being said, the first thing I would like to highlight is that in my point of view, today's environment of crisis is not only posed by COVID-19. Today's crisis, it's a sum of the pandemic with the reflection of the rise of populism, nationalism, and protectionism all over the world that undermine efforts towards a progressive agenda in local, regional, and international level. It seems that goes even deeper. And I venture to say that the actual crisis we are facing, and I would especially say that in Brazil, but not only in Brazil, it's an ethical crisis. An ethical crisis where academics are struggling to bring light and reliable information to a society deeply involved in a network of fake news and scientific denial. So here comes the second aspect I would like to highlight, the importance of relying in institutions that pursue rigor and independence of analysis, providing accessible information for the broad spectrum of the society, but most of all, developing reliable knowledge and policy solutions for the public sphere. And so, to remain relevant, it's vital through think tanks to rely on a core of capable professionals, aware of an environment of growing transnational challenges and oriented to the execution of independent qualified analysis that guide decision makers in the pursuit of public policies. Although there are some think tanks that produces analysis according to specific schedules and representing donors' values, it's also important to highlight that being flexible and capable to tackle events as they show up, it's an outstanding ability in time of crisis. Therefore, giving importance to human capital, its quality and constant training will, after all, serve as a driving engine for the institutions. After all, such distinguished human capital is our greatest achievement during our decade-long journey in ISAPE. My third point stresses the value of setting up a strong and collaborative network between think tanks and other research institutes, through which could be created a collaborative environment to share resources, data, and whatever is needed to help the pursuit and development of knowledge. Although we are based in the uttermost southern Brazilian capital, Porto Alegre, we are daily connected to a vast net of institutions in South America. In such times, it's very important to us to share, though, an expert analysis with foreign policies institutes, but also with institutes from other fields, such as global health and natural and hard sciences institutes. In times of crisis, a local, regional, and global network are essential to find common solutions for shared problems. That is what ISAPE is currently doing in such time of crisis, by engaging a broad and diverse audience to expert discussions in our webinars. That being said, I once more would like to highlight the importance of qualified and independent think tanks to guide decision makers on public policies process and to help set several civil societies agenda in an informed way. Thank you all for your attention. And now, Augusto, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Guilherme, for having me. First of all, I salute my dear colleagues, Mariana and Larlecianne, and our distinguished virtual audience that join us here today. It's a pleasure to join this historical event for our institute. I think that what Larlecianne just presented paves the ground for my brief presentation on Brazilian science and technology in times of crisis, especially because the main crisis that this webinar focuses on is mainly a public health crisis without precedent in the contemporary history. I also want to publicly express our solidarity and grief with the Brazilian families of the more of 218,000 COVID-19 fatalities in our country. Well, one question raised by the think tanks and civil society program at the University of Pennsylvania is how a specific example of think tank has provided a program, policy, or strategy to respond to COVID-19 pandemic that has been adopted by policymakers. Although several Brazilian think tanks were much concerned about COVID-19, two public institutions have stolen the spotlight: the Butantan or Butantan Institute, based on São Paulo, and the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, also known as Cruz, located in Rio de Janeiro under the Brazilian Ministry of Health. Both institutes are compromised to promote health and social development, to generate and disseminate scientific and technological knowledge, and to be an agent of citizenship, values that we are also deeply committed since our foundation back in 2010. That said, scientific research in the field of public health in the early 20th century encouraged the development of the national health research systems. It's worthwhile mentioning that both institutes were created at the very beginning of the 20th century as a reaction to the outbreak of the bubonic plague in Brazil. Nowadays, Butantan is the main responsible for the production of vaccines under the National Immunization Program, or PNI, and Cruz, that is the most prominent institution of science and technology in health in Latin America, in addition to its facilities in Rio de Janeiro, is present in 7 Brazilian cities and in the capital of Mozambique, Maputo. In few words, Cruz is a scientific institution run by the government of Brazil for research and development in biological science, considered one of the world's main public health research institutions. Similarly, Butantan is a public institution affiliated with the São Paulo State Secretariat of Health and is responsible for the production of 90% of the vaccines used in Brazil. With 120 years of existence marked by numerous technological advances directed toward public health issues, the Butantan Institute is also considered one of the major scientific centers in the world. On January 17, Brazil's national sanitary regulator, Anvisa, recommended that the emergency use of vaccines Coronavac of the Butantan Institute, in partnership with Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinovac and AstraZeneca of the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, Cruz, in collaboration with AstraZeneca Oxford Consortium. Both institutes and its entire technical staff have been tirelessly dedicated to making vaccines available to the Brazilian public health system and the Brazilian population. The authorization of the emergency use reflects the seriousness of the work that has been done by Butantan and Cruz. In order to conclude my presentation, I highlight that state and federal institutions that existed long before the crisis are weathering the storm and working to protect the nation. Moreover, Even with the scarcity of funding, research in the area of COVID-19 shows that public research centers support national scientific development. What we may also observe is that countries with established health production systems that involve different production chains are more likely to avoid shortage of raw materials and finished products that are essential for combating the pandemic. Finally, Brazilian rapid response was only possible due to decades, actually more than a century of investment in research and development in Brazilian human capital and facilities. Hence, we need to reinforce and protect the system from austerity policies that disregard health and knowledge as crucial investments for Brazilian society, much in line with the constitutional right to universal health and access and universal health coverage. Well, that is what I have to say for now. Thank you for your attention. Without further ado, I pass the word to our senior fellow, Professora Mariana Kalil. Thank you.
Thank you, Augusto. Well, I'd like to greet my colleagues and the audience. Thank you guys for inviting me to be here tonight. It's already evening in Brazil, and it's still the afternoon in the United States. Anyway, so my task here is to talk about the future of think tanks and policy advice in Brazil. What would I have to say about this from the beginning? From an overall view, I would say that the future of think tanks and policy advice in Brazil is definitely
I think we lost connection with Mariana momentarily.
Here too. I think we have a technical problem.
Yes, probably.
Let's just wait a few moments, see if she returns.
Am I here?
Yes.
Back
Good.
now.
Please go ahead, Mariana.
Incident, yeah, here.
From the beginning, please. From the beginning. I
live close by a favela, so this is what I was talking about. When you live in a third world country, you have to deal with peculiarities that you wouldn't have to deal otherwise. So the future of think tanks and policy advice in Brazil is definitely challenging. You have to deal with situations that you wouldn't have to deal with otherwise. That's exactly what I was talking about. But our main tasks would be expanding the civic space in the country, besides enabling policymakers through the supply of accurate information, reliable information. So about the task of expanding the civic space in the country, it is extremely important in light of, let me just say that I'm not talking on behalf of the Brazilian War College here, I'm talking on behalf of myself. So what I'm gonna say is about my research, not about the Brazilian War College position. So talking about the civic space in the country, in light of what we're going through in terms of our regime, and if we're gonna go through times of crisis in terms of authoritarianism and the tensions with democracy. So going through weathering this storm and this challenge to our institutions is going to be very complicated, and think tanks are going to have a very central role in tackling these challenges, because they can, not only because they can bring together government officials and civil society representatives, but also because they can provide both sides with reliable information. And so they can enable policymakers through the supply of accurate information, because one of the toughest problems we're facing now in Brazil is that our own officials believe in the fake news that sometimes their supporters believe. So they are not technocrats, they are not bureaucrats, they are not part of the state bureaucracy that has occupied the mall, the Esplanada, for at least 30 years now. So they are not experts. So they end up falling into a trap. And the role of the think tank would be to rescue them from this trap and letting them know what's accurate and what's real and what's fake. So it's a very important role, and it's a very challenging role as well. But I think ISAPE, our institute, is very well equipped to deal with this challenge because of the role it plays together with the military institutions, and not only through myself, but also through the relationship it fosters with the South Command in Porto Alegre. So I think it's very well equipped to deal with this situation. And that's actually what I want to talk about, especially the point of expanding the civic space in the country and maintaining the civic space in the country, because maybe we're going to be faced with the challenge of maintaining it, not only expanding it. Maybe if we go through a path of authoritarianism, the challenge is going to be to maintain it. And having this special role close to military institutions might make it easier for ISAPE to actually maintain it and keep doing its job. So yeah, I think we should open for the audience, and thank you for letting me be here today.
Thank you very much, Mariana, Augusto, Larli, for your presentations. We try to keep our contributions very short and objective in order to advance to the debate, since this is the main objective of the Why Think Tanks Matter forums that are being held worldwide. Therefore, I would like to once more invite our audience to submit questions in the chat. And I will quick start the debate by taking advantage of Mariana's experience with think tanks, especially in Rio de Janeiro and abroad. And as I said in my presentation, we noted an absence of independent, private, non-partisan think tanks in Brazil, such as ISAPE. But Brazil has a positive presence of another kind of think tank that you can see listed in the Global Go-To Index report, which are university-affiliated think tanks. These think tanks produce a great deal of knowledge and a great deal of contribution to our society. However, these think tanks, most of them, the best of them, are linked to public universities, which are now facing a difficult time in terms of funding, in terms of infrastructure, and have, therefore, their researches impaired by this situation. How do you see, Mariana, not only the future of policy advice and independent think tanks in Brazil, but also the future of university-affiliated think tanks that are facing this crisis with us, this national, economic, social, and sanitary crisis in Brazil?
So there are two ideas to explore in your question. One of them is how to deal with the shortage in resources that comes out of this crisis. So how to deal with that? They can expand their providers. They should expand their providers, and without becoming less independent, of course. But the other thing is that since they are affiliated to universities and knowledge from universities are being attacked by part of our public opinion, they are facing very serious. They are not relying on many technocrats, on many experts. They are relying on our everyday Joe, so to become part of bureaucracy. So how to be reliable to those people, even though they are connected to university, and universities are seen as the main ground for Marxism in Brazil. So even though they're not necessarily, but they are seen that way. So it's a highly complicated place for them to be associated with, and in times of crisis, in times of democratic crisis that we are facing. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Mariana. ISAPE, of course, as I mentioned, is not an university-affiliated think tank, but we have in our partnerships university-affiliated think tanks that work alongside us, such as the Center for International Studies on Government at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, the Brazilian Center for International Relations, NERINTE, also at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. So we are also bound to this reality, and many of us also act and work on other institutions, university-affiliated institutions, in order to complement the researchers that are being produced at ISAPE. For my second question, I would like to explore a little bit more of a very important partnership that we developed over the last year, focusing on South American integration, and that is the partnership with HEDAPE, the Argentinian Network for Professionals in Foreign Policy. And I couldn't think of anyone better to answer this than Augusto, who's been directly involved in this partnership. How do you point out the main contributions of these partnerships, of these two think tanks, one from Brazil and another one from Argentina, for national development, for public policies, and for the improvement of our researches?
Well, thank you, Guilherme, for your question. I'll be very brief here. I think that, first of all, the main catalyst of our partnership with HEDAPE, and I salute their research associates that are watching us. I think that that's not possible to talk about regional integration without a deep and real connection between Argentina and Brazil, and I think that's what this special relationship that we have with HEDAPE is about. So we have in HEDAPE a counterpart in Argentina, very close to Porto Alegre, that share with us the same values and same ideas that we do. So this is very hard today, and we respect and value this a lot. And in this moment, I think that the main thing to be highlighted here is that we have a joint understanding of how to respond to different problems, including what Mariana said about our problems with democracy in the region, in the whole region of South America, but also with the COVID-19.
Thank you, Augusto. And for my final question, I'd like to ask Larli, and I'll take advantage of her experience in the United States. Larli, how do you see, very briefly, the future of think tanks and policy advice in the United States, considering the change in administration? And how do you perceive how their impact on the foreign policy of Biden administration, which is much more aligned with the establishment, quote unquote, of think tanks, of American think tanks, than the previous administrations?
Thank you, Guilherme. Thank you for your question. That's a really good question. Actually, we are talking here not as an American, but like as a Brazilian citizen that lives in America. We are an immigrant, after all. We are really excited with the new administration and with all it represents, you know, for now on. Especially the immigrant community, I think it's kind of a relief, you know, and thinking all the positive ways that the Biden's administration is already treating, you know, all these issues with immigrants. And well, I guess, and I think that think tanks will have a really positive participation, I would say, during the Biden's administration, you know, bringing this knowledge that we are talking here, this reliable knowledge and academic knowledge as well, that it was in the past administration, the former administration was kind of left behind, you know, beside and not taken really serious, as we can see, you know, with the whole bunch of fake news and all these scientific denial things that we have been going through the last years. So I truly believe that this administration will have this input of going, through going and requesting the think tanks this analysis in a really broad spectrum of themes, and foreign policy is one of them, and so requesting also, I guess, the participation, and that's an important thing for us, being part of this event and being part of this global think tank. It gave us a voice, to shout and to show what is going on in Brazil, especially, and to take part and try to provide with quality information and reliable information, everything that we are going through, and the things that are important, for the relation between Brazil and United States, and well, for overall the things that we study and that we go that we've been developing in these past years. Thank you.
Thank you, Larly. And so moving on now to some questions from our audience. Our first question is from André Carvalho, and he congratulates ISAPE for the event. And he asks, as a grand strategy researcher, I see how important independent think tanks are to the process of devising long-term policy interests for the country. Do you want to comment on this, Mariana, since I know this is a theme that interests you as well? How do you connect grand strategy?
Well, it's very important to have booming civil society in terms of grand strategy. And although it doesn't sound natural in countries like Brazil, because defense has been a subject that's been very close to the power and very far from civil society, particularly since we've had a military dictatorship here in the country. We don't have the practice of having civil society close to the military, and close to decision makers in terms of defense, but having taken part in the decision-making process to develop the documents that are going to be the basis for our defense policy in the coming years, what I see is that when we have civilians in the process, and when we have civilians who are experts in the process, we have much better information delivered to decision makers. And this information changes their way of thinking and actually shifts the whole mode of operation from within when they are invited to speak to decision makers, of course. But when you have a think tank, you provide a platform for these people to be in public and to be publicly active and to be seen by these people all the time. So they feel pressured to include these people in the debate afterwards. So it's really positive to have a think tank like ISAPE taking part of this entire operation of bringing together the defense community from the civilian aspects of the defense community and the military aspects of the defense community. So I think it's very promising in Brazil, even though we're going through this democratic crisis. I really think we're going to come out of this stronger, and ISAPE is going to have a very interesting role in bridging the gap between civilians and military and make defense and grand strategy more democratic for the country.
Thank you very much, Mariana. We have another question from Frederico Frois. Do you believe the experiences learned from the COVID health crisis can translate into dealing with other types of crises in the future? Augusto, do you want to chip in on this one?
Yeah, I may answer this one. So thank you, Frederico, for your question. We have a very similar case with the current one, with the bubonic plague back in the beginning of the 20th century. And we are currently facing same political and social problems here in Brazil. For example, we have the same dilemma among economy and people. So what to prioritize? This is not a new problem during global health crisis. Fortunately, we have this human capital, as I said before, and facilities, this legacy of political representatives and decision makers from the past who created and maintained and invested in Butantan and Cruz. So perhaps today, it's my belief we do not need to do a main effort to create brand new institutes, but to strengthen the ones that we already have in this time that they are under attack, and it's not from today that they're under attack. So many people in Brazil got to know them only now, and this is very important to how they will continue to develop in the next century, hopefully.
Thank you, Augusto. We have another question. Are there opportunities for think tanks from the Global South countries to cooperate on socio-economic development matters? Anyone wants to answer this one? Mariana, please.
I've just written an article about how South-South cooperation is essential for development in Global South countries. After all, we're the ones who actually understand our problems. So, and a good example is the Butantan Institute, how it cooperated with China, and they came up with a vaccine that is actually solving our problem in Brazil. So we are the only ones who are capable of solving our problems. We can also exchange with Global North countries, of course, and they have a lot to give. But we are the experts in our own troubles. So Global South think tanks have a lot to share, and we have money. We have, like, Global South countries are not necessarily poor countries, so they can have funding. They can exchange funding. They don't have to be beggars for money from the Global North think tanks. They can exchange funding as well, and I think this is the major opportunity that we need to see, this avenue that opens with South-South cooperation in terms of funding. I think this is very promising, and this would be a cue for think tanks like ISAPE to go to actually grasp this notion of South-South cooperation and go through this avenue. We would create a very innovative research like Butantan did with China.
Guilherme, may I compliment?
Of course.
Really quick. No, it's really important what Mariana said, and it's really important also in this the way that we need to build up and to make this strong network of think tanks working globally, but also like linking like the Global South and linking our common problems so we can share our efforts, you know, and solutions, and come up with solutions that maybe like a solution that serves Brazil will also be okay or can be adapted, you know, to China or, you know, to other countries from the Global South, or even for countries in Africa. And like we have a lot of examples that we can go for example, with Brazil cooperation with Africa, and how now we are think tanks, we can, you know, link and create more links and create this overcome boundaries and be more close, you know, for to other countries in the Global South. And also like about the what we learned with the pandemic and what this can reflect in future crises. We learn, you know, to reinvent ourselves during this pandemic. We are still going through, we are still facing a lot of issues and facing a lot of challenges, and we are adapting, you know, for this new way of living, and adapting, being really assertive and being quick in the formulation of policies, and, you know, delivering reliable information for our governments and reliable information for the society, so the society can understand exactly what is going on, and have, you know, trustful information for understand, you know, all the situation, and not only local but regional and globally as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Larly. I think we have a very good final question to sum up our debate, sum up this Why Think Tanks Matter Forum. It is from Bruno Monticelli, and he asks, what are the main challenges think tanks in Brazil have to face? I would like to start by answering this one and then opening the floor for your contributions. But I think the main thing we have to do in Brazil when it comes to think tanks is spreading the word and teaching people what a think tank is, because it's really astonishing the amount of people who don't know what that is, what a think tank does, what is the importance of a think tank, why is it important to have think tanks, to promote dialogue with civil society, to promote dialogue with decision makers, with diplomatic personnel, and so on. So we have to foster this debate. We have to put the word out there and show that independent think tanks are not research groups from just a research group from a local university. They are more than that, and they can contribute to national development in a way that has been proven by all the developed countries in the world, in the system today, in the international system. So the first thing, in my opinion, is to foster this debate and reach out to the general public, to civil society about think tanks. And please, if anyone wants to comment or complement on this question, go ahead.
I'd like to weigh in. First of all, I'd like to say I'm sorry for the technical troubles we had before, but well, this is one of the challenges of living in a third world country. You need to deal with a grenade exploding by your house, and I live in a very nice neighborhood, which is weird. It shouldn't be happening. So I'm sorry, my connection fell, and I'm actually connecting from my phone now. So I'm sorry about that. But this is one of the challenges we face. If we are competing with Global North, or if we actually have Global North think tanks as our paradigm, then we're going to have very different challenges to address, because the infrastructure with which they deal from the very beginning is very different than the infrastructure from which we began from the very beginning. And I'm not talking only about funding, I'm talking about the actual infrastructure. So the types of software they can use, the types of even information data that they can process and they can actually offer decision maker. And it's very different, it's more mature. So when you have a more mature democracy, you have more think tanks, and you have more think tanks that are more capable of processing data. So we have to begin from the very beginning, and it's harder to begin from scratch almost, and to start by actually explaining to people what a think tank is, and then explaining to people that you are not, you don't have an agenda. Okay, you have an agenda to influence decision makers, but you don't have a dark agenda, and you're not gonna influence them in a certain way that's gonna harm them. You're only doing a constructive work, and you're not gonna establish anything that they have to do. It's just democracy, how democracy works, how the civic space is approached by civilians. And so this is something very difficult in Brazil. We don't have this tradition yet. So it's not only about the number of think tanks, but also about the tradition of having a public debate about certain issues. And defense is a very complicated issue, as we have addressed before. So yes, thank you for actually inviting me to be here today. Sorry for the technical problems. And yes, I concede the word.
Thank you very much, Mariana. It's always great to have you. Thank you also to Augusto, our Vice President, our Research Director, Larlecianne Piccolli. Thank you to our audience. Thank you above all to our over 50 associates who help us maintain ISAPE and the idea of ISAPE. Thank you to our Fiscal Council, to our Consultative Council in the name of its president, Professor José Miguel Quedo Martins, and everyone else involved with us. And we hope to be with you for a while. And thank you very much. Follow us on our social media, stay in touch, and see you next time.
It was a pleasure, Guilherme.